Welcome to Expat Hoops. Today we have a special episode with local journalist David S. Driver, who is releasing a book titled Hoop Dreams in Europe about American basketball players building their careers overseas, which, if you're a longtime viewer of Expat Hoops, happens to be a lot of what this podcast is about.
But before we get into the interview, if you want to hear more content about overseas basketball players, go to expathoops.com, our home for all your content and merchandise. You can get to our YouTube channel from there as well, where you can subscribe and hit the bell to get all of our latest content and all other social media. And now we'll talk to David, who's coming us from Cheverly, Maryland. Welcome to the pod, David.
Thanks, Tony and Andy. Great to see you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, no problem. Last we saw each other was at the George Mason, Maryland game. Let's talk A10. A lot of your book has a lot of A10 crossover. I think when I was going through the book, I think there was at least 7 schools that I counted off between Dayton, GW, Mason, UMass, Davidson, St. Joe's, LaSalle, and I might be forgetting somebody. So for somebody that's into the A10, tell them what they can expect in reading your book.
Yeah, well, thanks. Maybe some of that is coincidental, and I talk about this in the introduction. A lot of the book, it had a lot of the stories. I kind of reprinted some of my best stories. And so I initially needed somebody interested in a story. And so that, for example, was the athletic website at GW. It was the alumni magazine at the University of Dayton. It was the athletic website at George Mason. So it took somebody, an editor here in the States while we were overseas, to have interest in what I was doing. So, but you're right. There is a lot of Atlantic 10 content. Obviously, you guys are well aware now that we have 4 schools, within 100 miles of each other here in the DMV. So that appeals to me. I'm not a person that gets on a plane and flies to college basketball games. So it's really neat that there are a lot of Atlantic 10 connections. I'll throw one out. Damian Hollis was a really good player at George Washington on the men's side. And, we lived in Hungary for 3 years. Hungary is kind of a stepping stone for a lot of Americans. And there's other countries like that as well. Austria, perhaps, for example, or Romania. So, I tell people it's kind of like minor league baseball. If you start at single A in Salem, Virginia, in the Red Sox system, you want to work your way up. Well, that's sort of how things work, in my opinion, in basketball in Europe. You want to work your way up. So, Damian Hollis, he won a title in Hungary. There's a Duke player that actually started out in Hungary, and he won a championship after he'd won a championship at Duke. So Damian Hollis. We were talking about Taylor Brown, who is from Prince George's County. She started out at Georgetown and then transferred to George Mason. She is now playing in Sweden, but I did a chapter on her. She had earlier stops. So, if you look, and you guys know this from your podcast, it's rare to find an American that stays for a country for 5 straight years, right?
Not unless they screw up with a contract, which we've had that happen
Yeah.
last time, where they were desperate for a contract and signed that 3-year contract, and they're like, oops, this was not good. That was Terry Smith. If you want to hear that story, you can go over to our YouTube channel as well.
There's some really good stories out there, right?
For sure.
Depends on your perspective. If you're the person that's the signee to the contract, maybe not so much, but
good is relative in this case.
Yeah, it's true. So Damien, I'm trying to think of other examples. Kelly Austria is a guard for the University of Dayton. She was in Hungary 2 or 3 years ago. We lived in Hungary about 15 years ago, but we've been fortunate to go back a lot. My wife has had some teaching assignments, so we were back there in 2018, 2019. So Kelly Austria was playing in Budapest, and did a story on her. And I think last I looked, she didn't stay very long. Some people only stay a year or 2, and then they come back and get a 9-to-5 job, as you know. So those are a couple. I did see a VCU player in the Hungarian Cup. Last time I was in Hungary was in 2019. It was a perfect time because every February they do the Hungarian Cup. And so 8 teams come together. You've got access to, 3 or 4 Americans per team. So there was a player for VCU in that. Ronald Curry, a guard for JMU, was there, so I did a chapter on him. He's played in Latvia, Germany, Hungary. I think he's back in Latvia this year. So of course JMU is not Atlantic 10, but they're headed to the Sun Belt. So I wanted to try to represent as many conferences and as many parts of the country as I could with the book. But if you look at it, it is heavy on East Coast and Mid-Atlantic.
So I know you were in Europe to cover basketball specifically, correct?
Actually not.
Okay.
I
It's a
was
side hustle
trailing.
like this podcast too.
Exactly. I have a lot of friends, and we've side hustle is kind of our middle initial. My wife, it is local. My wife got her doctorate from University of Maryland in 2003. She was ready for something different. She'd always wanted to live in Europe. We had thought about going to Spain before we had children. We decided not to for various reasons, but in 2003, she got her doctorate. Our daughters were like 9 and 11. She had definitely wanted to live in Europe. I was a little hesitant, but she found an assignment at a really good university in Hungary, 2 hours south of Budapest, near the Serbian border. So I left my job as the sports editor of the paper in Laurel, Maryland, and didn't really have much idea what I was going to do. I have a friend that worked for NPR for a while, so I talked to him to see if maybe they need a foreign correspondent. But anyway, I just was mainly in charge of getting our daughters to school, which when you're in another country and you don't speak the language, that it may be a little harder than it sounds. So, and doing supper. So, but anyway, once our daughters and family got fairly situated, I started venturing out and checking the internet, and seeing what Americans were in Hungary playing basketball. There was only probably 15 or 20 guys. So I had to take a train about an hour north. I won't pronounce it because it'll make me sound like really like an idiot.
Hungarian, by the way, just as an aside, and
Yeah.
I don't know if this was your experience, but people in Hungary, they appreciate their language. They do not expect a lot of other people to be able to actually speak it.
You absolutely nailed it, Tony. And thank you that was the case, because if I could just say hello, or I learned how to say in Hungarian, I am a sports journalist. And I would just simply go to the games and show them my card, which was in Hungarian, thanks to a local shop there. And for the most part, that was, now when there were bigger events, like there were some, international and national championships in Budapest, there was a big wrestling tournament. I covered a hockey tournament with Canada, US, and Germany. So I had to go through the proper channels. But like the little town we lived in, the gym held 1,500 people. At that point, the men's team where we lived in Szeged couldn't afford American imports, but they could afford women. So American women would come through our town. So I saw some WNBA players in our town, but you're talking 1,000 people at the gym. I would just pay $5, and a lot of times I would go early and maybe catch them during warmups, but I would usually wait till after the game and just wait and say, I'm American. First of all, they would like, what are you doing here? I mean, not too many American journalists covering basketball in Hungary. So that was kind of how things got started. But you're right about the language. They are very appreciative of anything you try.
Well, there we go, Andy. We just got to go over to Europe and say we are sports journalists, and then we'll be good to go.
I was going to say, what actually is that? Let's test it right now. See your memory recall. What is it?
In Hungarian, 15 years later, if any Hungarian ever watches this podcast, I'm like going to be banished. I'll give it okay. I will say good. I will say hello, good day. Jóna put kívánok. That's good day to you. Okay.
That is two more words of Hungarian than either of us know.
Yep.
Okay. If this gets out to my friends, I'm just going to be.
Don't worry. We only have 393 subscribers, and we post on Reddit and on social media. Nobody ever sees it.
Okay, here goes. Új Shagiro Sport Vajok. I am a sports journalist. That is not sounding very good, but that's about, again, it's been 15 years since we lived there full time. It's been 3 years since I've set foot in Hungary. I took basic Hungarian 2 or 3 times through the university, which I loved. I don't think I ever got beyond basic Hungarian, but there were some great classes about the culture that were all in English. So I was able to study classes in English, which I appreciated.
Well, I got bad news for you. If you think we're going to challenge you on your Hungarian pronunciation, it ain't happening.
Well, yeah, I can say hello in Serbian. That's the only, or thank you. So
yeah, I wish
my 2 daughters and my wife are the language experts in the family. Our two daughters, we threw them into Hungarian schools. They did not know a single word. After 3 years, they were both, I'm biased, they were both pretty good.
Wow, not bad. Hungarian is it's a difficult language especially as a first language. It's usually something that people kind of adopt as like a second language to kind of challenge themselves a little bit, if you will, from the experience. I know the people that have tried that. I have to ask you too, in your experience in covering basketball in Europe, are there any places that you can think of within Hungary itself that are like more basketball crazy in terms of cities and others?
Yes, definitely. There is a town in Western Hungary near Lake Balaton. Lake Balaton is where everybody goes in August for a week at the beach, or the lake in this case. Again, okay, I'll go ahead and try to say the name of the town. Székesfehérvár. It's basically White Castle. So it's a town about an hour, and I went there many times. So like, if I would only have to go back to Hungary for 2 weeks and I had only one place to go, I would try to go there because they had the most money. They always had 2 or 3 Americans. That's where Damian House of George Washington played. There's another guy from GW that played there. So they always have good resources. Now, again, comparatively, I mean, it's not like they have a 10,000 seat arena, but the only Hungarian to make the NBA, David Cornell, depending on how you pronounce it. He is from that area, or at least that is where he got his start at the junior level. And then he played with Michael Jordan on one of the Bulls championship teams. So that is the place for basketball in Hungary. Now that said, I mean, like Debrecen is in the northeast corner, about an hour from the Ukraine border. They have really good resources as well. In fact, some European and international championships have been held there in the last 5 or 10 years, like the U17s were in Debrecen. They built a new arena there right after we moved back to the States in 2006. They built a new arena. So they've hosted some European championships. So I would say Debrecen in the northeast corner, and then Székesfehérvár over in the western part of Hungary, maybe an hour from the Austrian border. Those two. And that's the irony. You would think that Budapest would have the best team, right, or the best facilities. That's not the case. And that's probably, maybe that's true in other countries too. It's not, Vienna is the capital of Austria. Well, that doesn't mean that's the place with the most resources. It really depends on the community and the club. And you've heard this from guys and gals you've talked to. It's who can provide a free apartment, who can provide transportation and housing and meals. And in smaller towns, that's easy, to get 2 Americans to come to that town, that can make a huge difference in basketball, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, one thing's for sure, that when you said that Vienna is the capital, Budapest is the capital, they don't necessarily have the resources. We here in the DC area know that because the Washington Wizards are here. And they certainly wouldn't be confused with the best team in the United States. So we can relate a little bit with that.
There you go.
So when you were covering basketball, what gave you the idea? Because we've had a moment between the two of us where we conceptualized this podcast, and it was relatively simple. Andy came to me with an idea, and I said, that's not a bad idea. And then we sort of hit the ground running and figured out what we were doing from just, as we were. So and we're still kind of winging it in a lot of ways. We've learned a lot as we've done this podcast. Danny's learned a lot about social media and all that, but we didn't really have a grand plan for how this was going to go. How did you conceptualize the book? How did that get started for you?
Yeah, well, so I have notes to myself from 10 years ago. I thought about it, maybe 10 years ago, soon after we had moved back, but the timing wasn't right. We still were raising daughters, and the timing wasn't right. But since our daughters are grown and adults now, my wife and I have been fortunate to make return trips to Europe. We got to go to Belgium in like 2016. My wife had a fellowship in 2018, 2019. That took us to Russia, Portugal, Poland, and all these places. I went to games, interviewed Americans. And then last October, we made it to Spain, again, a new country. I went to 2 women's games, went to practice in Seville for the men, met a guy from DC who played at Hampton, did a story on him for the Washington City paper. So when we got back from Spain in October, that gave me 18 different countries, and it had been 18 years since we first went to Hungary. So I thought, okay, 18 years, 18 countries. I've got some new material from the 3 stories from Spain. I made it to Russia and got to actually the story I did in Russia was on the brother of NBA star CJ McCollum. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Yep.
The brother is a Division III product of Goshen in northern Indiana. He's played in Russia for several years. So all that to say is, getting new Portugal, for example, there was a woman from Davidson she was her first year overseas, American from Davidson. My wife and I met her for coffee in Lisbon. And so I did a story on her for the Davidson Alumni magazine. So when we got back from Spain in the fall, it was like, if I'm going to do this, now is the time. I've got the time to finish it. I've got the resources. I'm just really, I don't know if you guys, well, you've seen the cover, but was so pleased with the cover. I was fortunate to find a veteran graphic designer in the Baltimore area. And actually I started with the cover. I was like, I want it to look good. Even before I started compiling the chapters, I really wanted it to look good. And I really feel good about the cover. I showed the cover to several coaches and players even before I went to press. So that's kind of how it all started. And then, like I said, I had some new content, but I reprinted some of my stuff from previous years.
But it's an absolutely gorgeous cover. Really well put together, really nice quality photos too in the kind of the mid part of the book too. So not only is the writing really good, I can attest that the visuals of it too are very high quality.
Well, yeah, thanks. It's nice to get feedback. In retro, there's always hindsight's 2020. I almost wish we'd have had 16 pages of photos in the middle. I almost wish we'd had more photos. Because Russell did a great job on the cover. And he did a great job on the back cover. I mean, I've started to look at sports books now in a different way. And if you, not to be critical, but I said to Russ, I said, when you look at most books, you have just, you have written word on the back cover. It's like, why can't we put more art? I mean, again, I'm a writer, but I realize the value of art. And so he said, yeah, there's no reason why we can't. So I think he did a great job on the back cover too.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you one last question about related to the current conflict in Ukraine. You said, first of all, you visited Russia in 2018. I know you've covered basketball across a lot of Europe. You said you never quite got to Kyiv, even though you were bordering Ukraine in some of your time in Hungary. From your perspective, I guess the conflict itself is encompassing a lot of Eastern Europe. It's affected EuroLeague. It's affected all of basketball in terms of the business. In addition to all of the crisis of the refugees and things like that are horrifying.
Yes.
What can you say in terms of your thoughts on the conflict itself related to some of the material that you have in the book?
So to be honest, the book like went to press or was published like literally 2 weeks before the war started. So there's absolutely not a word in the book about the war. So I'll just say that. I mean, just the way the timing was, that's just how it happened. Yeah, so I'm not a political commentator. My wife was in Ukraine many years ago, even
Mhm.
before we moved overseas. She went there on a mission trip. Um, and she did have a fellowship in Russia. Like I said, in the fall of 2018. Um, you know, my father was able to go to Russia in the 1970s. And he, unfortunately, he's passed away many years ago, so I wasn't able to talk to him about that. But um, just to be able to go there, you know, um, you know, not too many people get to do that. So yeah, it's kind of emotional to think about it, to be honest. We have Hungarian and American friends who are in Hungary right now, dealing with the situation, a lot closer than we are. So we're just hearing a little bit from them. And we have Hungarian journalists who are covering the story, friends of ours who have been in the States, some covering the refugees coming across the border. And um, so, so yeah, it's hard to talk about. I get kind of emotional about it, even though we're not there, it's still kind of personal. So yeah.
Thanks again to David Driver for coming on the podcast today, spending time with us to talk about his book. Again, that's called Hoop Dreams in Europe. It's a great read, well organized, to pick up and read at any time. Andy's got a copy of the book there. We mentioned the cover art and the good job that was done on that as well. The book truly gives stories of both men and women playing professionally across Europe. David mentioned the 18 countries in 18 years that he visited. That's available now to read on Amazon, and we will put that link in the description below on this video. You can access it through his website as well. Dayton, as in the town of Dayton, David.com. DaytonDavid.com is where you can find it as well. David Driver, thanks for coming on to Expat Hoops this afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I've tried to find similar books. I haven't been able to find much about American women overseas. Some men have kept diaries, I've found. So yeah, I feel like it's something that maybe has been overlooked. So I'm really glad to be able to do it.
Happy to talk to you about it.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Hello, and thanks for watching. Be sure to give the video a like, and you can watch more videos over here. You can also click subscribe over here so you're notified when we have new content here on Expat Hoops.